Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're all doing good today. I've got a Reddit update story lined up for you. If this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe. A DNA test I took for fun just destroyed my family. I don't know who to tell first. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and I was standing in my parents' kitchen in Newton, peeling sweet potatoes and listening to a podcast about cryptocurrency scams, which felt appropriate because I was pretty sure I was about to get scammed by my own genome. The email had come through 3 hours ago while I was on the tee, but I'd waited until I got to the house to open it. I'd bought the kit during a Black Friday sale last year, the kind of thing you do when you're 28 and single, and your idea of a wild Saturday night is organizing your spice rack alphabetically. The box had sat in my bathroom drawer for 6 months before I finally spit in the tube and mailed it off. It was supposed to be fun, a lark, something to bring up at parties when conversation stalled. I remember the exact moment the percentages loaded on my phone screen. 50% East Asian. That tracked. My father, David Chen, is second-generation Chinese American, and his family genealogy book is basically a religious text in our house. He can trace his lineage back to the Qing dynasty with the kind of obsessive precision that makes Ancestry.com look like a guessing game. 25% Irish. Okay, sure. My mother, Sarah, is a blonde, blue-eyed Boston Brahmin who claims her family came over on a boat that was slightly nicer than the Mayflower. She jokes that I got all my father's genes, and looking at us, you'd believe it. I have his dark hair, his eyes, the shape of his face. Growing up, people used to ask if I was adopted, and my mother would laugh that crystalline laugh of hers and say, "Oh no, she's all David." I just carried her, but then there was the last quadrant. 25% Eastern European, not a trace of English, not a drop of whatever waspy genetic stew my mother should have contributed. I stared at the screen for a long time. Long enough that the podcast ended and another one started. Long enough that my mother walked into the kitchen, her cashmere sweater hugging her shoulders, and asked if I was planning to finish those potatoes or just perform an autopsy on them. "Mom," I said, holding up my phone like it was evidence in a trial I hadn't prepared for. "Did you know I'm 25% Eastern European?" She was reaching for the wine bottle on the counter. Her hand stopped just for a second. A tremor so slight you wouldn't notice it if you weren't watching for it, if you weren't the kind of person who notices when numbers don't add up, which I am. I'm a data analyst. I solve puzzles for a living. I find the anomaly in the dataset. I live for the moment when the pattern breaks. "Those tests are nonsense," she said, recovering with the kind of surgical precision I'd seen her use at dinner parties when someone brought up politics. "They just make up percentages to sell you more products. Last month, your Aunt Patricia got back results saying she was 12% Neanderthal. Neanderthal DNA is actually standard in most. Maya." She poured herself a glass of Pinot Grigio and took a long sip. "It's a fun gimmick. Don't let it ruin your holiday. Your father's been bragging about your promotion for weeks. Let's focus on that." She left the kitchen with her wine, and I stood there with a half-peeled sweet potato and a feeling in my stomach that I couldn't name yet. It wasn't quite dread. It was more like the feeling you get when you're proofreading a spreadsheet and you find one cell that's formatted differently from all the others. You know it means something, you just don't know what. That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling and listening to my parents argue behind their locked bedroom door for the first time in my life. Their voices were low, controlled, the way they handled everything. But the rhythm was wrong. My mother's voice kept rising and cutting off, like she was starting sentences she couldn't finish. My father's voice was a steady murmur, the kind he used when he was negotiating a business deal he knew he was going to lose. I couldn't make out the words, but I caught my name twice, and then I caught the word medical. I waited until 3 in the morning before I opened my laptop and uploaded my raw DNA data to a third-party database. Just to double-check, just to prove to myself that the first test was wrong, that I was panicking over a consumer-grade algorithm with a margin of error the size of a continent. I used a site I'd heard about on a true crime subreddit, the kind of place where amateur genealogists solve cold cases in their spare time. I uploaded the file, paid the $5 fee, and went to make tea. The match came back while the kettle was still boiling. Close family, parent/child. My heart did something strange in my chest, not a flutter, more like a skip, the way a record jumps when someone bumps the turntable. I clicked through to the details and there he was, Peter Hollins, born 1965, died 1998, car accident on a -95. The database had connected me to him through a distant relative who'd also uploaded their DNA, a second cousin or something, but the algorithm was clear. Peter Hollins and I shared a parent-child genetic relationship, which was impossible because Peter Hollins had been dead for 26 years, and my father was sitting in the kitchen 2 floors below me, very much alive and probably still arguing with my mother. I found his obituary in the Boston Globe archives. He'd been married to Linda Hollins, née Reeves, my mother's college roommate, her freshman roommate to be exact. The one she used to talk about in that nostalgic way people talk about friends they've outgrown, the one who'd moved to Philadelphia after graduation and fallen out of touch. There was a wedding photo attached to the obituary. Peter Hollins had dark hair and a chin that I recognized with a sudden, visceral shock because I'd seen it in the mirror every morning of my life. I called my brother Ethan at 6 in the morning. He picked up on the 3rd ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Do you have a minute?" I asked. "Maya, it's Saturday, I was asleep. Have you ever done one of those DNA tests?" A pause. A long one. I could hear him shifting in bed, probably sitting up, running a hand through his hair the way he does when he's stressed. Ethan is 2 years older than me, an architect, the kind of person who measures twice and cuts once and never asks a question he doesn't already know the answer to. "No," he said finally. "Why? I got my results back. They're weird. Mom and Dad are acting weird. Maya," his voice had changed, gone soft in a way that made my skin prickle. "Why are you asking?" "Mom already called me an hour ago. She told me not to talk to you about the medical stuff." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "What medical stuff?" "I don't know. She just said if you brought up any test results, I should tell you to call her." And then she hung up. We met at a diner in Cambridge the next day, a greasy spoon near MIT where we used to go when we were kids and our parents thought we were at the library. Ethan looked terrible. He hadn't shaved and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look 10 years older than 30. "When I was 12, he said, stirring coffee he hadn't touched, "I found a box in Dad's study. It was locked but the key was in the pencil drawer. I know because I'd seen Dad open it 100 times when he thought I wasn't looking. What was in it? Baby pictures of you, dozens of them. But the hospital bracelet in the photos wasn't from Mass General. It was from St. Agnes Women's Center. The name on it was smudged, like someone had tried to wipe it off but stopped halfway. I only saw it for a second before Dad walked in. He didn't yell. He just took the box, locked it, and said, 'Some things aren't for children, Ethan.' We never spoke about it again." I stared at him. "St. Agnes, that's where we were both born, didn't you know that?" "I knew I was born there, I didn't know you were. We were both born at St. Agnes, 2 years apart, but here's the thing, Maya." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I found my birth certificate last night. I was born at Mass General. Mom kept it in her jewelry box. I don't know why I never checked before." The diner seemed very loud suddenly. The clatter of plates, the hiss of the espresso machine, a group of undergraduates laughing 3 booths down. I felt like I was underwater. "I'm going to find Linda Hollins," I said. She was living in a nursing home in Brookline, the kind with manicured gardens and a smell of antiseptic lavender that hits you the second you walk through the doors. Linda Reeves now, according to the receptionist. Early onset dementia. Good days and bad days. I signed in as a volunteer and found her in a sunroom, staring at a television that wasn't turned on. She was small, smaller than I'd expected. Her hair was white and thin, but her eyes were the same pale blue I'd seen in my mother's college photos, the 2 of them posing with beers on a dorm room bed. I sat down next to her and introduced myself as a friend of Sarah's. Her head turned slowly, her eyes focused on my face, and something happened. A recognition that went deeper than memory, deeper than the plaque building up in her brain. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched my chin. "You have Peter's chin," she whispered. Her voice was paper-thin, but the words were sharp as broken glass. "Sarah promised me I'd never have to see you." My breath stopped. "Mrs. Reeves," she promised. Linda's eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. They just sat there, making her eyes shine with something that looked like fury. "She said you'd never know. She said it was better that way." Safer? Then her face went blank, the way clouds cover the sun, and she started humming a song I didn't recognize. She didn't speak again. A nurse came and gently led her away, and I sat in the sunroom with my hands shaking so badly I had to sit on them. I searched her room while the nurses were at lunch. I know I shouldn't have, but I was past should have by then. I was in the territory of need to know. In her nightstand, beneath a Bible and a stack of crossword puzzles, I found a pamphlet from St. Agnes Fertility Clinic, dated 1998. On the back, in my mother's unmistakable perfect script, were 5 words, Plan B if the first doesn't take. I drove to my father's office downtown without calling ahead. He was in a meeting, but his assistant knew better than to stop David Chen's daughter when she had that look on her face. I walked into the conference room and stood there until he excused himself, his face going carefully neutral in the way that meant he was furious and terrified in equal measure. We went to his office. He closed the door. I laid the pamphlet on his desk. "Dad," I said, "who is Peter Hollins?" He didn't look at the pamphlet. He looked at me and I saw something crack in his face, not a mask falling off exactly. More like a man who had been holding his breath for 28 years and had finally run out of air. "Your mother couldn't conceive," he said quietly. 1997. We tried for 2 years, nothing. We went to St. Agnes. They said IVF was our best shot. We did the hormone treatments, the injections, all of it. They retrieved her eggs, fertilized them. We were supposed to get 5 viable embryos. He walked to the window and looked out at the city he'd spent his life trying to impress. 3 weeks after the implantation, your mother started bleeding. We thought she'd lost the pregnancy, but the ultrasound showed a heartbeat, strong, healthy. We were relieved, grateful." He paused. "Then, at the 12-week appointment, the genetic screening came back. The embryo wasn't ours. The clinic had mixed up the samples. Your mother was carrying another couple's child." I felt the floor tilt. "Another couple, Linda and Peter Hollins, your mother's roommate from college. They were patients at the same clinic, same week. Someone in the lab made a mistake," or he stopped, shook his head. "By the time we found out, your mother was 3 months along. The clinic director came to our house. He offered us $200,000 to keep it quiet, to raise the baby as our own. He said if we went public, we'd destroy the clinic, destroy Linda and Peter's chance at having another child, destroy everything. So you took the money." "I took the money because my business was failing. Because your mother was hysterical and I didn't know what else to do. Because I looked at the ultrasound photo on the refrigerator and I saw a baby, not a percentage. I saw you." He turned to me and his eyes were wet. "I took the money, Maya. I'm not proud of it, but I never regretted having you, not for 1 second. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to fold myself into the version of the story where my father was a weak man who made a desperate choice and loved me anyway. But I was a data analyst. I knew when datasets were incomplete. Ethan was born 2 months after me," I said. "If Mom was 3 months pregnant when she found out about the mix-up, and Ethan was born 2 years later, that means she got pregnant with him naturally." While she was supposedly devastated by the IVF failure, my father's face changed. The grief calcified into something harder. "Yes," he said, "so the clinic didn't mix up anything, did they? Mom wasn't supposed to be pregnant with Linda's embryo. She sought it out, she wanted it." He didn't answer. That was answer enough. "Why?" I pressed. "Why would she want another woman's child?" "Huntington's," he whispered. "Sarah's mother died of it. Her aunt, 2 cousins. She got tested in college, positive gene. She never told me. She was terrified of passing it to her children, so she found a way not to. Linda Hollins had clean genes, a clean family history. Sarah convinced the clinic to implant Linda's embryo instead of hers. She wanted a safe baby. Then 2 months after you were born, she got pregnant with Ethan naturally. She rolled the dice with him. She lost." I stood up. The room was too small. The walls were pressing in. "I was the safe bet. Ethan was the gamble. She loved you both. She loves you both. She used me to protect herself from guilt," I said. "And she used Ethan to prove she wasn't a coward. Where's the love in that, Dad?" I left him standing at the window. I didn't look back. I found Olivia Marchetti through the DNA database 3 days later. She was 32 years older than me, a firefighter in Philadelphia. Her profile picture showed a woman with broad shoulders and dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, standing in front of a fire truck with her arms crossed. She looked exactly like Linda Hollins in the obituary photo, exactly like Peter Hollins's chin. I drove to Philadelphia on a Tuesday. I sat in a coffee shop across from her fire station and watched her through the window for an hour before I worked up the courage to send her a message through the database portal. I didn't know what to say. "Hi, I think we might be related because our mothers were involved in a fertility clinic conspiracy in 1998. Didn't seem like the right opener." She messaged back within 5 minutes. "I know who you are. I've been waiting for you to find me. We met at a park near the station." She was taller than me, tougher, with a scar above her left eyebrow that she didn't explain and I didn't ask about. She bought me a coffee and sat on a bench and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. I was adopted, she said without preamble. Closed adoption. St. Agnes handled everything. My adoptive parents were good people. They died when I was 19, car accident. I've been looking for my birth family ever since. I found Linda Hollins 2 years ago. She didn't want to see me. Sent a letter through her lawyer saying she had no biological children and any claim I made was fraudulent. She was protecting Sarah, I said. Or protecting herself. Olivia sipped her coffee. Her hands were steady, firefighter hands. I got diagnosed with Huntington's 3 years ago. I thought it was a random mutation, bad luck. Now you're telling me it came from your mother's bloodline. The bloodline she was so desperate to avoid passing on that she stole another woman's egg. I don't think she stole it. I don't care what you think. Olivia's voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise of the park like a knife. I spent my whole life thinking nobody wanted me. Now I find out someone wanted me so badly she engineered a way to keep me hidden. I'm not sure which is worse. We sat in silence for a long time. A dog ran past, chasing a squirrel. A mother pushed a stroller along the path, singing to her baby. Normal things. Things that didn't know we were sitting on a bench unraveling the fabric of our own existence. I need to talk to my parents, I said finally. Good luck with that. I didn't call ahead. I didn't warn them. I drove straight from Philadelphia to Newton and walked into my parents' house at 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening, ready to demand the rest of the truth, ready to scream if I had to. But when I opened the door, the dining room was already full. My father sat at the head of the table, his tie loosened, his face gray. My mother sat to his right, wearing the blue dress she saved for important dinners, her makeup perfect, her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a verdict. And across from them, in a chair that usually held my grandmother's antique quilt, sat a man in an expensive suit with a leather briefcase on his knees. Thomas Hollins, he said, standing when I entered. I'm Linda Reeves' son. And I'm here on behalf of her estate. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to me with the kind of professional sympathy that made me want to punch him. This is a cease and desist order. It has come to our attention that you have been harassing a vulnerable adult in a nursing home facility, making unsubstantiated claims about medical history, and attempting to access confidential records. Mrs. Reeves's estate is prepared to pursue legal action if you continue this campaign of harassment. Furthermore, any attempt to publicize false allegations regarding St. Agnes Women's Center will be met with a defamation suit that will, I assure you, damage the Chen family reputation beyond repair. I looked at my parents. My father was staring at his plate. My mother was looking at Thomas Hollins with an expression I can only describe as relief. You knew he was coming, I said to her. I invited him, she said. Her voice was steady. The voice of a woman who had been planning contingencies since she was 22 years old. I thought we could handle this like adults, privately, before you did something we'd all regret. All, I laughed, and it sounded wrong in that dining room, too loud and too sharp. Who is all, Mom? Is Olivia part of all? Is Ethan? Ethan isn't here, my father said quietly. Where is he? He's at a doctor's appointment, my mother said. He asked me not to tell you, he's getting tested. The room tilted again. I gripped the back of a chair to keep myself upright. For Huntington's, for everything, my father said. I looked at Thomas Hollins, at his cease and desist letter, at my mother's perfect composure, and I realized that this wasn't about truth anymore. It was about control. They had controlled the narrative for 28 years, and they were going to keep controlling it until every person who knew the secret was either paid off or buried. I took the letter. I took Ethan's box of photos from where he'd left it in the hall closet, and I walked out. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my apartment with the box on my kitchen table, and I went through every photo, every document, every scrap of paper my brother had collected. Most of it was standard childhood memorabilia. Report cards, birthday cards, a lock of baby hair tied with a blue ribbon. But at the bottom, beneath a false bottom that I found only because I was looking for anomalies, was a receipt from St. Agnes dated March 1998, embryo storage and disposal, $200 paid in cash. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, were 8 words that changed everything. 2 implanted, 1 mine, 1 hers, neither disposed. Both born, I read it 10 times, 20, I don't know who to tell first. The phrase ran through my head like a ticker tape, but this time it wasn't panic, it was strategy. I had the receipt, I had the pamphlet. I had a half-sibling with Huntington's and a brother who was getting tested and a father who had taken hush money and a mother who had engineered the entire thing. I didn't know who to tell first because I didn't know who would listen. So I started making a list. I called Olivia the next morning. I found something, I said. I think you need to see it. We met in a hotel bar in Hartford, halfway between her life and mine. I laid the receipt on the table between us. She read it twice, her face going pale beneath her tan. 2 implanted, she repeated. 1 in each woman. Sarah carried me. Linda carried you, same day, same clinic. They knew there were 2 embryos, they knew both were born, and they let Linda give you up while Sarah raised me like I was her own. Olivia's hands were shaking now, firefighter hands shaking. Why? Why take 1 and give 1 away? Because Sarah only wanted 1, the safe one, the one without her DNA. She couldn't risk keeping you 2, too many questions, too many witnesses, so she made a deal. Linda got money. Linda got silence, and Linda got to keep her husband out of prison. What? Peter Hollins was committing financial fraud in 1998. Sarah knew about it. She threatened to expose him unless Linda signed the adoption papers and disappeared. That's why Linda never looked for you. She couldn't. She was being blackmailed by her best friend. Olivia stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. She walked to the window and stood there for 5 minutes, her back to me, her shoulders heaving. When she turned around, her face was dry but her eyes were wild. She gave me up to save herself, Olivia said. And she kept you to save herself. We're both just variables in her equation. Yes, I said, but we don't have to stay that way. I planned the confrontation for a week. I chose a Saturday. I told my parents I wanted to talk, to clear the air, to find a way forward. I told Ethan to come home for a family dinner. I told Olivia to arrive at 6:30. I didn't tell anyone else who would be there. When Olivia walked into the dining room, my mother dropped her wine glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, a sound like a gunshot. Red wine spread across the boards like blood. Sarah, Olivia said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. You look just like my mother described you. Cold, beautiful, terrifying. My father's face went slack. He looked from Olivia to me to my mother, and I saw the exact moment he realized that the life he'd built was a house of cards in a hurricane. What's going on? Ethan asked. He looked small in his chair, smaller than I'd ever seen him. Maya, who is this? This is Olivia Marchetti, I said. She's your half-sister. She's Linda Hollins' daughter. And she's here because Mom invited Thomas Hollins to serve me with a cease and desist letter, and I decided I'd rather serve the truth. My mother didn't move. She stood in the center of the room with wine soaking into her shoes, and she looked at Olivia with an expression that might have been recognition or might have been grief. It was hard to tell. I'd never been able to read her. She trained me not to. You made a pact, I said to her. In college, you and Linda. If one of you couldn't have children, the other would help. That's what this was supposed to be. A gift between friends, but then you got your Huntington's test back and you panicked. You convinced Linda to donate an egg. You told her it was just to help you have a baby, but you always planned to use her embryo. You wanted a child without your DNA. And when Linda got pregnant too, when she wanted to keep her own baby, you threatened her. You used Peter's fraud against them. You made her choose between her daughter and her husband's freedom. My mother's voice was barely audible. She agreed. She signed the papers. Because you gave her no choice, I shouted. The word bounced off the walls. You stole her child. You stole me, you paid off a clinic, and you blackmailed your best friend, and you let another woman give up her daughter so you could have the perfect family. And then you got pregnant with Ethan naturally, even though you knew you were positive for Huntington's, because you needed to prove you weren't a coward. You needed one biological child to balance the scales. Was it worth it, Mom? Was any of it worth it? She didn't answer. She sank into a chair and put her face in her hands, and for the first time in my life I saw her shoulders shake. But I didn't feel triumph. I felt empty. I turned to my father. Was the money worth not knowing who I was? He looked up at me and his eyes were so old, so tired. I knew exactly who you were, he said. You were my daughter. The test doesn't change that. The biology doesn't change that. I held you when you were born. I taught you to ride a bike. I watched you graduate. You're my daughter, Maya. You always will be. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid, because I took the money, because I thought if you knew you'd leave, and I couldn't bear that. I wanted to cry. I wanted to fall into his arms and let him tell me it was all going to be okay, but I was past okay. I was in the country of consequences now. I turned to Ethan. Did you get tested? He nodded. He looked like he was going to be sick. Last week, the results came back yesterday. And, positive, he whispered. I have the gene, 40 CAG repeats. I'll start showing symptoms in 10 to 15 years. Maybe less. The room went very quiet. My mother looked up from her hands, and the sound that came out of her was not a word. It was a sound I'd never heard before, a sound like something breaking that had been bent too far for too long. She reached for Ethan, but he stepped back. "You gave me this," he said to her. His voice was steady, but his hands were trembling. "You knew you had it, you knew you could pass it on, and you had me anyway, not because you wanted me. Because you needed to prove you weren't scared. Well, congratulations, Mom, I'm terrified, I hope that makes you feel better." He walked out of the dining room. Olivia watched him go, and something shifted in her face. She looked at my mother with an expression that wasn't anger anymore. It was pity. "I spent my whole life thinking nobody wanted me," she said. "Now I know someone wanted me so badly she ruined 4 lives to keep me hidden. I don't know which is worse." She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. "I'm going to go find your son. He shouldn't be alone right now." She left. My father sat in his chair, staring at the wall like he was trying to see through it to some other life. My mother was crying now, really crying, the kind of crying that doesn't care about makeup or dignity or appearances. I stood in the doorway and I felt nothing. I felt everything. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. On the screen was a draft email. I'd written it at 3 in the morning, fueled by coffee and rage and the kind of clarity that comes when you stop lying to yourself. The subject line read, "The St. Agnes twins. A fertility clinic's 30-year cover-up." The recipient was a journalist at the Boston Globe who specialized in medical ethics scandals. I showed it to my mother. Her eyes widened. She reached for the phone, but I pulled it back. "I don't know who to tell first," I said. My voice was calm, steady, the voice of a woman who had finally found her data set and was ready to publish the results. "So I'm telling everyone." I hit send. 3 months later, the article is the most read piece in the Globe's history. The St. Agnes Women's Center is under federal investigation. 3 doctors have had their licenses suspended. Class action lawsuits are piling up like snowdrifts. My parents are separated. My father moved to an apartment in Back Bay where he drinks too much scotch and calls me every Sunday to ask if I'm eating enough. My mother is in therapy, which is ironic, since she's the one who always said therapy was for people who couldn't solve their own problems. Ethan started a Huntington support group. He talks to Olivia every day. She's enrolled in an experimental treatment program in Switzerland. They have dinner together once a week. They look alike, I've been told. I haven't seen them together yet. I'm not ready. I don't go home for Thanksgiving. I spend it alone in my apartment with a frozen pizza and a new spreadsheet. I'm tracking the lawsuit, the clinic's bankruptcy filings, the genetic testing bills that keep arriving in Ethan's name. I organize them by date and priority. It helps. 2 weeks after Christmas, I take another DNA test, not the consumer kind. This one goes to a research lab at Johns Hopkins that studies chimerism and embryo splitting. I'm not looking for parents anymore. I'm looking for data. I'm looking for the truth of my own cells. The results come on a Tuesday. I open them at my kitchen table, the same table where I found Ethan's box. The letter is formal, clinical, written by a doctor who doesn't know my story. Subject exhibits genetic markers consistent with 2 distinct embryonic cell lines. Rare case of spontaneous chimerism. Subject is genetically both herself and her twin. I read it 5 times, 10. I look up chimerism on my phone. It's real. It happens when 2 embryos fuse in the womb, 1 person, 2 DNA profiles. Different cells in different parts of the body. It would explain why my ancestry test came back with percentages that didn't match my face. It would explain why I have Peter Hollins' chin but David Chen's eyes. It would explain everything or nothing, or maybe just that the truth is always more complicated than the story we tell about it. I pick up my phone. I scroll to Olivia's number. She answers on the first ring like she's been waiting. "Hey," she says. "Hey." I look at the letter. At the words that mean I am not just one thing, I am not just stolen, I am not just kept, I am both, I am neither, I am something that doesn't have a name yet. "I think we need to talk," I say, and I tell her everything.